Hello, sleepyheads. Welcome back to Koala Moon. This is the Snaffles Bedtime Story Collection, the perfect compilation to help kids relax and fall asleep. These soothing bedtime stories can be left playing with no risk of ads or wake-ups. Shall we begin? I'm going to introduce you to a family who are on a mission to get to the bottom of an intriguing mystery. Socks have been disappearing from their washing line, and the family are determined to find out where they have all gone. Let's hear what happens when the family investigate the mysterious puzzle of the missing socks. This is Snaffles and the Great Sock Heist by Gillian Rogerson. It was the start of the school summer holidays. Mina and her little brother Kamal were lying in the garden and gazing at the sky through the branches of a tree. Their mother was busy chatting to Mrs. Fuddle over the garden fence. Mina smiled dreamily as she thought about the summer days that lay ahead, like a never-ending quilt of adventure. Because she was the oldest, Mina decided to take charge of the holiday activities, and she shared her ideas with Kamal to see what he thought. He liked all of her ideas, especially the ones involving trips to the seaside and the local park. His eyes sparkled with delight, and he said, "Don't forget about the ice cream. We should have lots and lots and lots of ice cream." He began to count his favourite flavours on his little fingers. Mina smiled at her brother. He did so love ice cream. She laced her hands behind her head and thought about the book she'd finished reading the previous day. It had been a mystery story, and she had very much enjoyed finding out how the mystery had been solved. Mina loved mystery stories almost as much as her brother loved ice cream. Thinking about her book gave her a wonderful idea. She sat up and said to Kamal, "We should solve a mystery." Kamal didn't know what a mystery was, so Mina did her best to explain it to him. As he listened, Kamal scrunched up his nose, and Mina could tell he still didn't understand. Mina tried to think of an easier way to explain it. But at that very moment, she overheard an interesting conversation taking place between her mother and Mrs. Fuddle. "It's a mystery," her mother said, her hands resting lightly on the garden fence. "A complete mystery. I just don't know where they go. And it's been happening for weeks." Mrs. Fuddle said, "Oh, it's funny you should mention it, because it's been happening to me also. And some of our neighbours have talked about it too. How very peculiar. You are right, it is a mystery." Mina jumped to her feet and held her hand out to Kamal. She told him their mother was talking about a mystery, and she wanted to find out what was going on. Kamal took his sister's hand and ran with her over to their mother. The children stood politely at their mother's side and waited for her to finish talking to Mrs. Fuddle. When she came to the end of her sentence, their mother looked down at her children and smiled. She asked how they were doing and if they were having a lovely time in the sunshine. Mina and Kamal nodded and smiled up at her. Mina said she'd heard her mum talking about a mystery and wondered what the mystery was. Her mother chuckled and pointed to the laundry drying on the washing line. She explained that socks had been going missing from the line over the last few weeks. It was only one sock that went missing each time, never a pair of socks. At first, she had thought the missing sock had been left in the washing machine or in the laundry basket. But after checking those places, she didn't find any odd socks there. She had even checked everyone's bedrooms in case there was a lost sock hiding underneath their beds. But again, there wasn't, and she was convinced that the socks had indeed disappeared from the washing line somehow, and it always happened when she was inside the house. Mina tapped her chin and said, Interesting. Kamal tapped his chin too and said, Yes, interesting. Mrs. Fuddle joined in the conversation. The same thing has been happening to me, and it's been going on for a few weeks too. I didn't say anything to your mum because I thought the socks would turn up somewhere. But they haven't. She frowned. It's always a sock that goes missing from my line too. Never anything else. Just a sock. I don't know if the socks are blowing away in the wind or if someone is taking them when I'm in the house. But why would someone take one sock? It's a mystery, Mina said. A complete mystery. It is, her mother agreed. A mystery I'd love to solve. Perhaps I should investigate it, like one of those detectives in your books, Mina. Mina clapped her hands excitedly. Yes, you should do that. Can we help you? Can we solve this mystery together? Her mother smiled and said that was a wonderful idea, and together they would solve the great sock heist. Kamal asked what a heist was, and his mother explained it was when something went missing, sometimes in a mysterious way. She asked Mrs. Fuddle if she would like to join their team of detectives. I wish I could, their neighbour replied, but I've got a million things to do today. Let me know how you get on. She waved goodbye and went into her house. Mina asked her mum what they should do first. Her mum tapped her chin as she thought about the best way to start their investigation. She said, If someone has taken the socks, we should start with a list of suspects. Seeing the confused look on her son's face, she explained a suspect was someone who might have taken the items. The family fell silent as they pondered possible suspects. They soon realized they didn't have any. Mina said, I know what we need to do. She dashed into the house and returned with a notepad and pencil. She opened up the notepad and said, We should make a list of our questions about the mystery and then work out how to answer each one. When we have all the answers, then we'll be able to solve the mystery. Simple. The family came up with a list of questions, and Mina wrote them all down. Did the socks fly off the line in the wind? If so, are they somewhere in the garden? Did the socks go missing at the same time every day? If someone has taken the socks, why would they do that? And do they have a favourite colour of sock? The last question was Kamal's. When Mina wrote it down, he felt very proud to be an important member of the detective family. Mina looked at the questions and said, If the socks were taken by a person or an animal, perhaps they have very cold feet and they need to keep them warm. I don't want anyone to have cold feet. If we find out who is taking the socks, can we let them keep them, Mum? I've got plenty of socks. They can even have some more if they like. Kamal said they could have all of his socks because he didn't even like wearing them. He wriggled his bare toes inside his sandals and grinned. Mina's mum gave her children a fond look and said if they did find out someone was taking the socks because they had cold feet, she would give them hers too. And she would also knit some special ones for them. She loved knitting socks and had a huge stash of wool just waiting to be made into rainbow-coloured socks. Mina suggested the family hide in the kitchen and peep through the window to see if anyone came in for the socks. "Great idea," her mum said. "There are plenty of socks already on the line. Let's go inside and see what happens." The family went into the kitchen and peeped through one of the windows. They waited and waited. After a while, Kamal started to fidget. He had to use the bathroom. Mina did too, and so did their mother. The family took it in turns to use the bathroom. They returned to the kitchen and looked through the window. A sock was missing. "It's one of mine," Kamal said happily. "I'm glad they've taken one of mine. I hope they come back for the other one." Mina asked her mum if they should try hiding again. Mum had a bit of a cheeky smile on her face. She said, "I am interested to see who's taking our socks, but let's see if they like all of our socks. I haven't tried this before. I'm going to put a pair of your dad's unwashed socks on the line and see if they get taken." At the thought of their dad's unwashed socks, Mina and Kamal pulled a face and then laughed at each other. Their mother left the room and went in search of their father's socks. When she came into the kitchen, she was holding them at arm's length and trying not to breathe in the strong smell. She went outside and quickly put them on the line. She returned to the children. Whilst they waited to see what would happen, they sat on the sofa in the living room, and their mother told them a story about a princess called Samira, who found a magical silver scarf inside a secret cave. The children instinctively snuggled closer to their mother, and she wrapped her arms around them. She spoke in a soft, soothing voice. Little Kamal fell asleep. Mina soon followed. Their mother stopped talking and closed her eyes. The family had a peaceful nap and woke up at the same time. They went into the kitchen and looked at the washing line. They were astonished to see that both of their father's socks had gone. The children's mother started laughing and said that was the first time 2 socks had been taken, and she would remember to tell their father, as she was sure he would feel very special indeed. Mina peered closer through the window and said there was a piece of paper on the line where the socks had been. They went outside and looked at the paper. It had words on it. Mum read it out. "Dear family, thank you very much for all the socks. It's very kind of you to give me such a wonderful gift. I hope you don't mind, but I took 2 this time because they smelled so lovely. Kind regards, Snaffles." A heart had been drawn beneath the words, along with a picture of a smiling animal that looked like a cute, fluffy dog, but who was standing on 2 feet. Kamal said Snaffles looked very kind. Mina's mum smiled softly and agreed. She said it was a lovely note, but she didn't know why Snaffles thought the socks were a gift. Perhaps they should try to meet Snaffles and explain they weren't a gift. "But Snaffles can keep your dad's socks. I don't want them back," she added. Mina had an idea. "We need a trail to follow, something that will lead us to Snaffles. And I know what to use." She needed her mum's permission for the first part of her plan. When her mum heard what her plan was, she readily agreed. Mina went into the house and came back out with a pair of bright red socks. She gave them to her mum, who carefully unpicked the end row of wool from each sock and then tied it to the line. Mina explained to her brother that when Snaffles took a sock off the line, the end bit of wool would stay tied to the line and the rest would unravel, trail along the ground, and lead them to Snaffles. Hopefully their plan would work. At that very moment, the cheerful sound of the ice cream van filled the air. The children's mother knew that the great sock heist would have to wait. The children would want an ice cream, and she was going to have one too. The family left the garden and joined the queue outside the ice cream van. They returned to the garden with huge swirls of strawberry and chocolate ice cream towering on top of cornets. Each ice cream was covered in sparkling sprinkles. One of the red socks had been taken from the line, but the family were too absorbed in their delicious treats to notice. When they did finally notice the missing sock, little Kamal pointed excitedly at the line and said, "Look, Mina, your plan worked. There's a line of wool on the ground to follow." He cheered loudly. The family left the garden and began to follow the trail of wool. The red wool led them through the field behind their house and into a small woodland area. The wool ended in front of a large tree that had a door carved into it. The family were familiar with the woodland area and had never noticed the peculiar tree before. One word had been etched into the door: Snaffles. The children's mother tapped lightly on the door. The door opened, and Snaffles stood there. He looked a bit like an adorable dog, and a bit like a fluffy cushion. He wasn't much bigger than Kamal. His fur, which was the colour of golden straw, ruffled gently in the wind, and huge brown eyes gazed kindly at the family. Snaffles smiled and said hello. Looking into his kind eyes made Mina and her family feel all warm and fuzzy inside. They had never seen such a captivating creature before, and their hearts melted. Mina thought he looked like a smiling, fluffy cloud on legs. Mina smiled and held up the end of the wool. She said, "Hello, sorry to disturb you, but did you take a sock from our garden? And are you Snaffles?" Snaffles chuckled, his joyful laugh bubbling like a stream tumbling over rocks. The happy sound made the family laugh too. He said, "You are not disturbing me at all. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Yes, I am Snaffles, and I think I know your names. Are you Mina? And is your brother called Kamal?" Mina and Kamal nodded. Snaffles looked at Mina's mother warmly and said, "And your name is Mum? I've seen you hanging the washing out sometimes when I'm flying." "You can fly?" Mina asked. Snaffles nodded and continued talking. I only moved here recently, and I love how happy everyone in your street is. I wanted to say hello many times, but I was too shy to introduce myself. Thank you so much for all the socks you've left out for me. It's very kind of you. I don't know what happened to that wool you're holding, Mina. It started off as a sock, but then it vanished on the way here, and all that's left is the wool. Mina had so many questions for Snaffles that she didn't know where to begin. Snaffles said, "Your generous neighbours have left socks out for me too. I usually only take one, but I did take 2 earlier from your garden. Oh, because they smelt so fragrant. That's why I left a note to explain. But you must have one of them back, Mum. I shouldn't have taken 2. He reached behind his ear and took one of their father's unwashed socks from it. He gave it to Mina's mum. She quietly thanked him and put the sock in her pocket. Mina's mum didn't have the heart to tell Snaffles the socks hadn't been a gift, and she didn't really have the heart to tell him her name wasn't really Mum. Kamal pointed to Snaffles' ears and said, "That's a funny place to keep socks." "Is it?" Snaffles said. "I like how they feel there. They're like little cushions for my ears." Kamal put his hand over his mouth and giggled. Snaffles looked at Mina's mother and said, "Mum, would it be okay if I invited you and your children into my home? I'd like to show you what I've done with all those socks you and your neighbours have given me." The children's mother said they would love to see inside his home. Snaffles opened the door wider, and the family stepped inside. They were amazed at how big the inside of it was. Mina suspected there was something magical about Snaffles. Snaffles took them around his home and showed them how he'd used the socks. In the kitchen, they saw socks hanging on the walls, and inside them were spoons, forks, and a pair of salt and pepper pots. In the living room, some socks had been sewn together to make cushions. A couple of socks were propped up against the cushions, and books poked out of them. Smaller socks were hanging from the lampshade, which looked very jolly. Snaffles took them into the bedroom and pointed to the bed where 6 teddy bears were snuggled inside some of Mina's socks. Snaffles said he was hoping to make a big blanket when he had enough socks. The family were taken into the bathroom, where they saw a toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste in one of Kamal's school socks, and a brush and shampoo in one of their mother's. Mina and her mother didn't know what to say. They had never seen socks used in such a variety of ways before. Kamal said, "Don't you ever wear the socks on your feet?" "My feet?" Snaffles said in surprise. "Why would I wear them on my feet? That's a very strange place to put them, if you don't mind me saying so." "But that's where they go," Kamal explained. He took the toothbrush and toothpaste out of his school sock, kicked his sandal off, and pulled the sock on. He pointed to it and said, "Look, that's where they go. If I had the other sock, it would go on my other foot. I don't really like wearing socks all the time. except for my fluffy ones that I wear at bedtime." He took the sock off and gave it back to Snaffles. Snaffles looked extremely puzzled. He peered closely at the sock and said, "I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense. Why do you put them on your feet?" "To keep my feet warm and snuggly," Koala said. "Try it." Snaffles gave the sock a suspicious look and put it on his foot. His eyes widened in surprise. "Goodness me, that feels wonderful. So cozy and soft and snuggly. Let me put another one on." He found another sock and put it on. Snaffles broke into a huge, blissful smile. "My feet are so happy. So very, very happy." He jigged from side to side and then twirled around. All of a sudden he stopped smiling. "If you need socks, then why do you keep giving them away?" Mina's mum kindly explained the socks hadn't been a gift. But now that they had met Snaffles and seen how cleverly he'd used the socks, they insisted that he keep them. Snaffles took the socks off his feet and said he couldn't possibly keep them. He apologized for thinking that they were gifts. He said, "I saw one of your neighbors hanging some socks out a few weeks ago, and she said to her husband they were a present. She must have meant that they had been given to her as a present. But at the time, I thought she meant they were a present for everyone else. After that, every time I saw socks on washing lines, I thought they were gifts, and that I could help myself to them. I only took one sock so that somebody else could have the other. I've made a terrible mistake. I'm so very sorry." Mina's mum said, "None of that matters now. I'm glad you took the socks because it meant we got to meet you. I might keep some of my belongings in socks now. I love how you've done that. Please do keep the socks. This time they are gifts. And when I explain to my neighbours what's happened, they will say the same thing." Snaffles took some convincing, but he finally accepted the gift. With a shy smile on his fluffy face, he said, "Mum, I saw you making some socks in the garden last week. You were using some sticks and wool. The socks were beautiful. Do you think you could show me how to do that, please? I would love to make my own socks, especially now that I know they go on my feet." "I certainly can. It's called knitting, and I have more wool than I know what to do with. Snaffles, would you like to come back to our house? We'll be having something to eat soon, and you are welcome to join us. And after that, I will teach you how to knit." Snaffles nodded, tears of happiness in his kind brown eyes. The family took their new friend back home. Snaffles insisted on introducing himself to the neighbours so he could apologise for his misunderstanding about the whole sock business. Just as Mina's mother had said, the neighbours insisted Snaffles keep the socks. Some of them said he could have more if he wanted. Snaffles became a regular visitor to Mina and Kamal's home. To his delight, he found he was extremely good at knitting, and he created socks very quickly. Sometimes the families on the street would wake up and find extra pairs of beautiful socks on their washing lines. They knew the socks hadn't appeared by magic. They had been put there by a kind-hearted, fluffy animal who had become everyone's friend. Snaffles loved wearing socks on his feet, especially during the colder months. But his favourite pair of socks were the unwashed ones that had belonged to Mina's dad. Snaffles used them as little cushions for his ears. Every night, as he snuggled down in bed, Snaffles would think about his wonderful new friends and how lucky he was. He would wriggle his toes inside his fluffy, warm socks, sigh happily, and drift into a deep, deep sleep. Snaffle's Little Shop of Treasures by Susanna McLaughlin. It was a hot summer's day when Mina and Kamal decided to visit Snaffles again. The neighbourhood was warm and still, and there were flowers sprouting from everywhere and bumblebees buzzing from garden to garden. The smell of barbecue smoke hung in the air, and kids strolled through the village riding bikes and having water fights. It had been months since Mina and Kamal first met Snaffles, the pom-pom of a creature who was like a smiling golden cloud on legs, with a sock on each foot, of course. When they found him, they had been on a mission to find all the socks that had been squirreled away from people's washing lines. It turned out the sock thief was smaller and fluffier than they expected. When Mina and Kamal were led to Snaffles' home, the hollow of a tree where the walls were hung with socks, and they were in use everywhere you looked, as mittens and earmuffs, as tea cozies and cushions, and everything else you could think a sock could possibly be. He'd used them for everything, apart from putting them on his feet. Silly old Snaffles. Anyway, Mina and Kamal had put everything right, and once Snaffles realised the socks left out on the lines weren't intended for him, he stopped snaffling them away and only helped himself to the handmade ones the neighbourhood had started making and leaving out especially for him at the bottoms of their gardens. The fluffy little creature hadn't been seen in anybody's garden for a while, though. In fact, believe it or not, Tina at number 15 had pinned a stripy pair of socks for him the night before, and they were still there the next morning, shining with dew. That was unusual, and Mina and Kamal thought they better check everything was okay. So after breakfast, they headed down to the bottom of the garden and into the golden field beyond. They crossed the field towards the cluster of oak trees that backed onto the forest, slowed down by an impromptu cartwheel competition and a short break to stare down a rabbit hole. Once into the green shade of the trees, they headed over to Snaffle's tree. Now, thanks to Graham at number 3, there was a carefully whittled sign over his round red door reading Snaffles in curly letters. The door knocker had a sock over it, as if to keep it warm. Mina and Kamal shrugged and knocked with their fists instead. Before they could go for their second rap on the wooden door, it burst open, and a blur of orange fluff went tearing past down the path, arms full of packages. Snaffles' voice drifted back over his shoulder as he went. "Hello, Mina! Hello, Kamal!" he said, as they began to follow him into Sleepy Forest. "It's jolly nice to see you two. And on such a special day. Yes, it's awfully important. A very big day for old Snaffles." The kids grinned at each other as they tried to keep up with their friend. "A big day?" Mina asked. "Why?" "What have you been cooking up these past few weeks, Snaffles?" Kamal chuckled. Snaffles stopped on the path and whirled round to show his beaming smile. "Well, Kamal, I've been starting a business." "A business?" Mina said. "A business I've been opening." Snaffles swept his hand across the air, as if imagining the sign over the door. "Snaffles' Trash Emporium." Mina and Kamal swapped amused looks. Who would come to buy trash? "Trash Emporium?" Kamal questioned. "Yeah, I was going to go with garbage shop, but I thought that sounded more luxurious," Snaffles grinned. "I've been collecting lost and broken things, and today I'm opening my shop to sell my wares. It all started with the socks. When you told me they go on your feet, I couldn't believe it. I was using them for all sorts of purposes that had nothing to do with keeping your toes toasty. And I started to think of the other things I use, and how some of those started off with totally different purposes too. I want to show people that lost and broken bits and bobs can be put to good use. All you need is a little imagination." "You've got lots of that, Snaffles," Mina laughed. "Indeed I do," Snaffles giggled. "But I can't stop and chat. I've got a shop to open. Follow me, friends." And with that he twirled on his toes and headed back along the path, humming hurriedly. Every now and then he added a little skip to his steps. So excited was he to finish his big project. After following the path past 2 old oaks, a maple grove, and a batch of silver birch trees, the 3 friends came to a clearing, and Snaffles bundled into a ramshackle cabin, dumping all of his packages and beckoning the kids to come see. Kamal and Mina were busy taking in the view of this peculiar structure. The cabin seemed to have been built by Snaffles. There was a little tuft of yellow fur stuck on a nail on the roof. The whole thing had been designed to look like a wooden mushroom, with a round base and a bulbous, rounded roof. A wonky chimney poked out of the top, and odd-shaped stained glass windows were built into the wall, looking out into the forest. Snaffles was grinning out of one now, his face funnily distorted by the glass. Snaffles opened the window and called, "Glass bottles! I made the windows from a mosaic of glass bottles. Some I found on the beach, the others I got from Betty Badger's. Her sodas come in all sorts of candy-coloured bottles." Mina and Kamal grinned. The effect was beautiful, in an off-the-kilter fairy tale kind of way. It already looked like the cottage was at home in the clearing, with bright green moss growing on the windowsill and red and white toadstools shooting out of the grass, little mirror versions of the big wooden mushroom above. A painted sign above the door reading Snaffles' Trash Emporium glistened in the sun. "Don't touch it. It's still drying," Snaffles warned. The kids climbed the 3 creaky stairs and stepped into the shop. It was a wonderland of shining trinkets and odds and ends all glimmering in warm orange light. It was like a gleaming treasure trove, but instead of jewels and gems, the treasures were things like pennies and bottle tops. The golden light twinkled and caught on them regardless, and the whole thing was glorious. It was almost too much to take in. Mina's breath caught in wonder. "Oh, Snaffles! It's wonderful," she said, and she really meant it. Every inch of surface was covered in things. Some things she didn't recognize and some things she did. It was like a museum of oddities, like a gorgeous, shimmering, lost and found. Kamal picked up the tip of an acorn, which he assumed had blown in through the window, and went to flick it out of the front door. Snaffles rushed over on his little feet and stopped him. "Put it back, please. That's going to be a bestseller, Kamal," Snaffles said. Kamal squinted at the little acorn cap in puzzlement. "What do you mean?" he asked. Snaffles raised his eyebrows as if it was obvious. "For the snails. It's a snail hat." Snaffles carefully took the acorn tip and put it back on the shelf next to a line of others. Kamal approached and looked at them closer. "Oh, yeah," Kamal said. "I see that now. They've got tiny tassels." It was true. On the end of each stalk of each acorn cap, Snaffles had carefully sewn a miniature tassel from loose thread. Snaffles began giving the kids a tour of the shop, beaming with pride. He picked up a sheet of paper which he'd framed and propped on a shelf. "See this?" he said. "People leave all sorts of treasures laying in the grass. This is a poem I found near the general store." A dreamy look clouded his eyes. "It's romantic, really. A poet wrote this and lost it, and it floated on the breeze into my paws. Now, we have no way of finding out who they are or what was their true meaning with this poem. All we have is their words." He cleared his throat and began to recite. 1 punnet of strawberries. 3 bunches of grapes. 1 bag of onions. Mina cut him off. "Snaffles," she said. "That's not a poem. It's a shopping list." Snaffles squinted at the paper for a moment, then giggled. "Oh, yeah," he said. He read the paper again in his hand, realization dawning in his eyes. "You're right. But Mina, anything can be poetry, really. Beauty's in the ear of the beholder." He put the framed shopping list back on the shelf and bumbled on to the next shelf along. He picked up a round piece of glass and held it up to his eye. The golden brown eye behind the lens grew in size as he peered through. It was a lost lens from someone's glasses. Someone who had very bad sight indeed, it seemed. "A magnifying glass," Snaffles said, placing it in Kamal's hand and ushering him over to the shelves. "You can use it to look at teeny tiny things, like these." Kamal held the lens near his eye and bent over the shelf where neat rows of little crumpled bits of paper stood in regiment, like little soldiers, waiting for orders. As Kamal moved the lens and the image began to come clear, he gasped. The paper wasn't crumpled. It was folded into tens of little tiny paper frogs. Snaffles had made the most beautiful, precise, tiny origami frogs. Each one glimmered in a different colour, all rich, shining jewel tones. "Are they sweet wrappers?" Kamal asked. Snaffles nodded proudly. "From Papa Pralin's extra sticky, chocky-coated toffees." Kamal sniffed the air. The frogs did smell kind of chocolatey. He handed the glasses lens to Mina, who looked at Snaffle's miniature creations in wonder. She told him she thought they were simply marvellous and that she herself would like a miniature frog army. Snaffles took one and pressed it into her hand, promising he'd make her more after opening day. He said he'd make her a whole legion of the things. Next, Snaffle said he had more art to show them, taking them behind the counter with the till on it. In a little alcove above his head, there was a stand labelled with a little card that read, "Sculpture by Snaffles." On the stand was a sculpture of a happy little bat, made out of an old broken umbrella. Snaffles had bent the broken metal spokes to make its body and stretched the black material over the top for its skin. It was so cute, and the perfect Halloween decoration, though Halloween was months away. It was even waterproof, perfect for the garden. A cabinet near the doorway was full of broken toys that Snaffles had made sweet again, covering chips in wooden toys with little fabric band-aids, attaching lost doll arms with yarn and fashioning them in a little sling from an old handkerchief. He'd replaced the lost wheel of a toy car with a polished round stone and put a little felted badger in its front seat as its driver. And, pride of place on the table in the centre of the room, surrounded by jars of odd buttons and piles of door handles and bits and bobs like that, was a violin, freshly polished and gleaming. It had 3 normal strings, but the 4th was made of a pond reed, woven tight and stretched across the instrument. Snaffles picked up the bow and demonstrated the changes he'd made to the once broken violin. Its new string sounded much different to the others, and whilst he sawed his bow over the first 3 strings, making a jolly melody, he plucked the grass one, and it plink-plonked in a funny way that somehow made the song feel fuller and more bouncy. Mina and Kamal hooked elbows and danced in circles while Snaffles played, and Kamal even did a funny little jig that made the kids laugh. Finally, Snaffles said he wanted to show them one more thing. It was a vase, covered in delicate paintings of flowers and carts pulled by horses, and little cowboys swirling their little lassos. But, most notably, it was cracked all over, as if it had been smashed to smithereens and put back together. It had. What made it extra special is that the paste that connected each piece was a bright, shining gold. Kamal traced the golden cracks with his finger. It was beautiful, like a cracked riverbed or golden paths forking through the landscape of the painted vase. "Kintsugi," Snaffle said proudly. "Kint whaty?" Mina asked. Snaffles explained. He said kintsugi was a Japanese tradition, the art of putting broken things back together. He explained that broken pottery would be carefully and lovingly put back together using powdered gold or silver in the glue that holds it back together. This way, the broken thing becomes more beautiful than when it was whole. It just shows, he said, that if a mistake is made or something breaks, with a little TLC, it can come back stronger than before. As they continued gazing at the vase, the kids began to notice a ruckus outside. Merry voices were laughing. An odd clattering and thudding made it sound like a party was being set up in the clearing. Snaffles was expecting the kerfuffle. He whooped and headed outside. There, vendors were setting up their little stores, and a band was warming up. Snaffles headed back into the wooden mushroom cabin and came out with a white bedsheet, on which he'd painted the words, "Grand Opening." He was much too short to put it up, so Mina and Kamal hung it for him, whilst he said things like, "Left a little, right a little, no, the other right." The band soon began to play. They were a jazz band with shining brass instruments gleaming in the sunshine. The front man was a whale with a fishbowl of water on his head like a space helmet, and, true to his species, he was wailing away to the songs. Slowly, the clearing filled with animals of all kinds who'd come from all areas of Sleepy Forest. A little koala named Koko and his family entered the party, and Koko joined the band, playing on a pink ukulele, whilst his little sister Kira danced with their grandpa. Everyone was here to show their support to Snaffles. Soon a line twisted out of the wooden mushroom and across the grass. People standing in line were served cloudy lemonade by Betty Badger and given hot dogs fresh off the barbecue by Munchie the raccoon. Mina and Kamal each wolfed down a hot dog before slipping back into the shop, where they were sure Snaffles would need a hand. Even though the cabin was large, it was crammed with furry animals, all with their eyes sparkling and mouths hanging open at the treasures around them. Snaffles was darting between them, sometimes weaving through legs or climbing over tables, a flash of fur calling out, "Excuse me's," and "What can I do for yous?" and "Thank you, come agains." Mina and Kamal told him they'd take over the cash registers, whilst he served the customers, and he gave them a grateful smile. As busy as he was, Snaffles was all aglow and full of pride that his new dream had come true. The first customer in the queue was Peanut the armadillo, the jet-setting tourist who was always off to foreign lands. He placed a pair of sunglasses on the table. The lenses were made with old CDs, cut down to little circles, with the little hole in the middle for looking through. They were pretty strange and intriguing, so Kamal asked to try them on. The glasses weren't so good at shielding his eyes from the sun, but as they shone in the light, they let off little rainbow-like beams, which Mina told him looked pretty cool. When Peanut put them on, he looked funny with his little beady eyes peeking through the round silver discs, but he strutted and twirled, and his attitude brought the look together perfectly. He traded the glasses for 5 golden buttons and 3 acorns, which the siblings knew Snaffles would be thrilled with. Next in the queue was Cuddle, the little platypus, and her kangaroo best friend Kevin. Kamal reached down to take the lunchbox she was buying from her little paws and set it on the counter. It was an old tin lunchbox that had been polished and buffed to look almost new. On the front it had a character from an old TV show who looked like a wizard with a long stripy scarf. Cuddle grinned and said she'd watched the old recordings of the show with her dad. She said the wizard guy fought aliens and flew a spaceship. Kamal and Mina thought that sounded pretty cool. Cuddle handed Mina a broken pen and a slinky in payment for the lunchbox, which Mina accepted with a grin. Cuddle waddled out, Kevin bouncing next to her, both looking at the sheeny, shiny lunchbox. Then Fritz the frog hopped onto the counter. He had a handful of origami frogs in his webbed fingers. He grinned and popped them down in front of the kids. "These, please." Kamal counted 6 little frogs. "They're for my cousin Philomena," Fritz said. "They reminded me of her, since she's the teeniest, weeniest frog I know." He chuckled. For the frogs, Fritz left behind a lovely sheet of fabric woven from reeds and a few dried water lilies that Snaffles could definitely make use of for his art. And so the afternoon went on, with customer after customer making trades and purchases. When Snaffles finally flipped the open sign to closed, the shop was a little depleted, but the till was full. Though the shop was closed, the party continued, and heading outside to join in, Snaffles let loose. He took his violin from the shop and played along with the band, his legs bending and kicking and jigging as they played. He, Kamal and Mina played games, tossing beanbags into baskets and playing jump rope, with Snaffles hopping and skipping as the kids chanted rhymes and twirled the rope. The sun soon began to sink down towards the horizon, and the sky was painted in rich pinks and purples and blues. The little creatures began to yawn and head back to their homes, patting Snaffles on the back, giving him hugs and offering him their heartfelt congratulations as they left. Soon, it was just Kamal, Mina, and Snaffles left in the clearing. Snaffles locked the door of the shop with a big old brass key, and the 3 of them headed back towards his tree. Mina and Kamal each reached an arm down around Snaffles' shoulders and told him they were proud of him. They thought his trash emporium was going to be a great success. They did tell him he should change the name, though. They said not one thing in that shop could be considered trash. It was all treasure. They led Snaffles back to his hollow, kindly refusing his offer of a cup of tea. They could see that he was yawning and slouching lower into himself, like he was about to fall asleep where he stood. They bade him a final good night before heading back home. As they walked back through the field of golden wheat, the air was perfectly still. A handful of stars began to dot the night, peeking through the colours of the sunset sky. The siblings were both yawning as they trudged back to their home, each step feeling heavy as they began to look forward to their warm and cosy beds. Kamal said that he was proud of their friend, but he hoped that he'd still be coming around to their street looking for socks now and again. Mina agreed and said he needn't worry. Snaffles would be selling sock sculptures before they knew it, and that after today, she'd quite like to foray into Sleepy Forest every now and again to meet more of Snaffles' friends and now customers. Kamal agreed and said, in fact, why not go back tomorrow? But first, sleep. Each in their own rooms and in their own warm beds, the kids dreamt similar dreams that night. Dreams where things were one thing but also another. where a shopping list could be a poem, and a sweet wrapper a frog, and where a little ball of golden fluff was dancing and painting and playing his violin. As the moon rose and the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Snaffles too set to bed, and snuffling and snoring, dreamt of his friends and his new store, and all the things he was yet to make. All three drifted off with smiles on their faces. Snaffles, as we know, takes great pride in his unique wares, and he likes to show them off to their best effect to his valued customers of Sleepy Forest. This evening, as he's going about his jobs, something quite unexpected happens. Okay, it's time to begin. Snaffles and the Dust Bunnies by Susanna McLaughlin. It had been a peaceful day in Sleepy Forest. The pine trees were studded with pine cones. The conkers were starting to grow on the chestnut trees, and the clearing that housed Snaffle's little shop of lost things was blanketed with little lilac wildflowers and red-capped toadstools. Snaffles had enjoyed a steady flow of customers all day, picking up trinkets and toys and leaving their broken or found objects in return. But now, it was time for Snaffles to turn the sign on the door from open to closed. The little furball of a creature looked around his little shop with a smile on his face. He'd sold lots today. He'd sold a handful of origami frogs, a sailor hat he'd made from papier-mâché, and a necklace made of seashells that clacked and clinked against each other, making the most beautiful sounds. Now, it was time to replenish his stock. Snaffles sat at his little desk and turned the handle on his music box 1, 2, 3 times until soft tinkling music began to play. He always listened to his music box as he worked. First on his list, he needed to fold more frogs. Snaffles took the shiny box of chocolates that Papa Praline had given him in return for a patched-up cagoule and placed it on the desk. He put his furry feet up next to them as he unwrapped each chocolate and popped it in his mouth. Once he'd gobbled the lot, he straightened out the jewel-coloured papers and began to fold. One frog took shape in glistening green, and the next in jewel pink. He made ones of silver and gold and vibrant purple. Then, once all the wrappers had been transformed, he lined the little frogs on their shelf, ready to be picked up tomorrow. His next creations were inspired by the slow, warm breeze drifting through the window of the mushroom-shaped cabin. He took a ball of twine he'd been saving for an occasion such as this and attached long strips onto little hooks. He rifled through his drawers of knickknacks and odd bits and pulled out pennies and clamshells and sea glass and old sardine tins. Anything that might tinkle and clang. He attached the prettiest of these objects onto the twine, and before long he was done. Wind chimes. As an experiment, he hung the longest wind chime from the ceiling of the cabin, sucked in a breath so big he thought he might float away, and blew. A soft song of tinkles and clunks came from the dangling objects. Perfect. He tied a piece of ribbon around each wind chime and laid them out in his emptiest display case. Finally, he had to fix a broken jewellery box brought to him by a Grandma Koala. The velvety box had a ballerina inside that was supposed to twirl to the tinkling song of Swan Lake. Right now, she was stuck stock still. Snaffles put on his round, wire-rimmed glasses and tinkered around in the mechanism, switching a broken cog for a perfectly round flat stone. He wound the handle, and sure enough, the ballerina resumed her pirouette. Perfect. Just like that, all his work was done. Snaffles looked around his glistening grotto and smiled. Now all that was left was to clean. He took his box of old socks, put one on each hand and each foot, and skated across the floor, scooping up any dust that had gathered there. Then, with 2 new socks on his hands and 2 on his ears to keep them warm, he dusted and polished every last trinket, every sculpture and toy and tool, until everything was sparkling. When all this was done, he gathered the dust into a large pile and went to suck it up with the hoover. Only, when he turned the hoover on, it whirred and groaned and whimpered and turned off again. He tried again, but this time all that came out was a splutter. Snaffles shook his head. The hoover was on the blink again. He looked out of the window at the sunset that started to glow on the horizon and shrugged. There was no time to fix it tonight. He was having tea with his friends, Mira and Kamal. It would have to wait until the morning. He said goodbye to his shop, turned the big metal key in the door, and skipped off into the evening. The next morning, when the birds were still singing their morning songs, Snaffles came back into the clearing and walked up the steps to his mushroom-shaped shop. He stretched, he turned the key, and in he stepped, ready to tackle the calamitous hoover. But as he bent to open the mechanism, he stopped. The hoover was still where he left it, as was every other item in his shop, but the pile of dust was gone. Snaffles scratched his head. He had closed the window. Yes, that's right, the window was closed. No breeze could have blown the dust away, and the shop was still sparkling clean. Had the dust just grown legs and walked into the hoover? He checked the hoover bag for dust before shaking his head and chuckling at himself. "Don't be silly, Snaffles," he said. "Dust can't grow legs and walk." He was just gathering together his spanners and screwdrivers when he heard a little giggle. And another. A kind of snuffly, sweet little sound. And there, on his desk, was a couple of bunnies. They had long, fluffy ears and pom-pom tails like regular bunnies, but they weren't covered in regular fur. Theirs was more light, more cloud-like, kind of dusty looking. A light bulb went off in Snaffles' head. "Just bunnies?" he exclaimed. He'd heard the phrase before, but he never knew exactly what it meant. "That's right," the black bunny said. "We're dust bunnies." "What, have you never met a dust bunny before? I'm Soots," the soft grey bunny at his side said. "And I'm Binky." Soot and Binky. Snaffles rubbed his eyes as if he didn't believe them, as if he blinked hard enough, they might disappear. "Come on, Snaffles," Binky said. "You know how magical Sleepy Forest is. You didn't really think you could leave a big pile of dust overnight and not expect it to be turned into dust bunnies." Snaffles giggled. It was silly of him, he supposed. He should be used to the miracles that happened around here by now. "Dust bunnies, hey? I guess I don't need a hoover anymore," he said. Soots made a yucky noise. "Ugh, no. You can make dust bunnies instead in future. We make excellent pets, you know. This place would make a great pet shop." Snaffles scratched his chin. Snaffles' little shop of lost treasures and Pet shop? It kind of made sense. Taking something old and making it new, turning dust into dust bunnies. Okay, Snaffles said. But I don't want to sell you two. You can be mine. Snaffles, Suits, and Binky. It kind of has a ring to it. That's great, Suits and Binky said. But, what about those guys? Binky pointed behind the cash desk with one long ear. Snaffles peeked over the counter, and sure enough, nestled behind there were 3 more dust bunnies. One was white, one was sandy, and one brown. They all waggled a paw at him. Pom, said the white one. Puff, said the sandy one. And Pinky, said the brown one. Snaffles rustled his eyebrows at that. Whoever heard of a brown bunny named Pinky? But he smiled politely and said, How do you do? We want owners too, Pinky said. And it's time to open your shop. Perfect timing, right? Pom and Puff giggled. Find us our owners, Snaffles, please, they crooned. The bunnies were looking at Snaffles with puppy dog eyes, but it was unnecessary. Snaffles needed no persuasion to help friends in need. Snaffles immediately agreed. Then he skipped over to the door and turned the sign to open. Snaffles explained to the dust bunnies that to find their owners, they had some work to do. They needed flyers and a sign, and they needed to spread the word all over Sleepy Forest. The world needed to know that dust bunnies were real and that they were here in Snaffles' shop. First, a sign. Snaffles took Suits and Binky, Pom, Puff and Pinky into the clearing to find the perfect material to make their sign from. The bunnies skipped and played and hopped through the wildflowers as they went, and their giddiness was contagious. Snaffles did a couple bunny hops too, and then a cartwheel and a roly-poly. When they'd stopped playing and focused back on task, Snaffles and the 5 dust bunnies began rifling through the pile of old wood and furniture he kept behind the shop. How about this? Soot said, sniffing at a wooden tabletop with no legs. That's a possibility, Snaffles said. But it'll take a lot of paint to show up on that. Keep digging. Finally, Pinky gasped. Here, she said. It took Snaffles a second to locate her, as she'd burrowed deep into the pile. But once he'd pulled her out, he saw exactly what she was talking about. Ah, of course, the school's old chalkboard. Snaffles hurried into the shop and brought out an old ice cream tub full of odds and ends of chalk in pinks and greens and oranges that he'd been saving for an occasion like this. They set the chalkboard on the grass and created their sign. Snaffles wrote, Dust Bunnies for Adoption, in big swirling letters, and the bunnies decorated it with drawings of daisies and stars and sunshine. Puff spent all his time doodling a self-portrait that looked less like a bunny and more of a splodge. But the big smile he drew represented his own perfectly. Once it was finished, Snaffles hung the sign on the front of the shop just under the window. Next, flyers. Snaffles pulled scrap paper from his waste paper basket, and the bunnies set about with markers designing flyers, while Snaffles tended to a raccoon customer who was captivated by his wind chimes. Once the flyers were ready, and the raccoon had headed back down the forest path, pockets clinking, Snaffles headed to the window, cupped his hands, and cooed like a pigeon. The dust bunnies were concerned he might have gone loopy, But within minutes, Penny, the post pigeon, had arrived. She spent some time cooing at the little dust bunnies before tying the flyers to her foot and promising that she'd spread them across town. It only took an hour for the first customer to come. It was Mr. Moose, the tall, shy fellow in a flat cap, who spent most of his days reading the paper in his cosy chair and shuffling around his cabin. He cleared his throat as he entered. "Good day, Snaffles," he said. "Good day, Mr. Moose," Snaffles replied. "What'll it be? Have you run out of hand-spun yarn already?" Mr. Moose grinned sheepishly and shook his head, admitting he hadn't. He still had a sleeve yet to knit on his latest jumper. He'd actually been enjoying a muffin at Betty's bakery this morning when a flyer dropped from the sky and onto his head, advertising dust bunnies. "I had a strange feeling in my heart," he said, "that I should come here and see what the fuss was about." Snaffles looked at the 3 dust bunnies waiting on the desk. Pom and Puff were watching with interest, but Pinky was captivated. Her eyes were glistening, and she looked like she was stopping herself from jumping right into Mr. Moose's arms. "I have that feeling in my heart too," Pinky admitted in her sweet, snuffly voice. "I got it when you walked through the door. I think you're supposed to be my owner." Mr. Moose's eyes lit up, and he scooped Pinky into his arms. She tucked her ears under his chin and beamed at the others. Snaffles was touched by the moment. "Oh, she's all yours, then," he said. Mr. Moose asked what dust bunnies ate, and Snaffles had to admit that he didn't know. Soots rolled his eyes. "Cabbage, duh," he said. "Or carrots, or celery, or anything, really." Mr. Moose smiled. Perfect. Pinky waved at the other bunnies and told them she'd see them soon. And then Mr. Moose walked out of the store, taking Pinky to her new home. It was around lunchtime now, and having been reminded that he hadn't yet fed the dust bunnies, Snaffles prepared a big crunchy salad, apologizing for being an atrocious host. The bunnies giggled and told him he needn't worry. He was marvelous. As they were polishing off the last of the lettuce, the door swung open and another customer walked in, clutching a flyer. A little kangaroo, followed by 2 larger kangaroos. Mum and Dad, Snaffles supposed. "Hello, Kevin," Snaffles said. "What can I do for you, my friend?" Kevin grinned, bouncing to see him over the counter and showing him the flyer. In the other hand, he had another piece of paper, which looked suspiciously like a report card. Snaffles took both off the little kangaroo and perused the report card. Reading, B. Writing, B. Art, an A and a gold star. Snaffles held the card to the light, making the gold star shimmer, and beamed down at Kevin. "Kevin, you got a gold star," he said. The little fluff ball went around the desk and gave Kevin a big hug. He knew Kevin had been working hard for that star. Kevin's mum grinned. "We told him if he got his gold star, he could finally get the pet he's been asking for," she explained. "And what was in the postbox next to his report card? Your flyer. It's like fate." Snaffles clapped his hands excitedly, calling the dust bunnies to hop down to the floor where they could see Kevin. Kevin stroked both Pom and Puff, tickling their tums and chasing them around the shop in a game, but Snaffles could tell it was Puff who was giggling the hardest. when Puff jumped into Kevin's arms and Pom hopped back on the desk beside Soots and Binky, he wasn't surprised. Kevin looked at Pom in the eyes and promised him they'd be best friends forever, alongside his best friend, Cuddle, anyway. Pom waved at the other bunnies and told them she'd see them soon and went off home with her new family. Not long later, the door swung open again. This time, the shop was flooded with activity as Betty Badger and her 3 children bundled in. Snaffles had never seen Lavender, Chip and Ginger so excited, not even when their mum made a 5-layer cake for their birthday. Pom grinned. She turned to Soots and Binky and whispered, "These are mine. I can feel it." The 3 little badgers immediately began fawning over Pom, stroking her white fur and oohing and ahhing at the tricks she showed off, hopping this way and that. Betty waited until they'd all calmed down a little and took the bunny in her arms. "Now, Pom," she said, "we live in a bakery. That means early morning starts. Would you be okay with that?" Pom smiled and said yes. She loved seeing the sunrise. "And it can be a little hectic with all of these little badgers running about. Would that be okay too?" Pom nodded. She'd be bouncing around with them. "And we often have a lot of sweet treats laying about. Would you be opposed to nibbling on carrot cake all day?" Pom's eyes were practically sparkling. "No," she said. "Then you're the dust bunny for us," Betty said. Pom threw her little paws around Betty Badger's neck and squealed with happiness. Soots and Binky clapped their paws together and cheered as they left to return to the bakery, promising to visit soon. As the door swung closed, Snaffles put his hands on his hips, nodded to Soots and Binky, and grinned. "Mission complete," he declared. All there was to do now was take down the sign. As Snaffles headed out to the door and into the clearing, he stopped in his tracks. Emerging from the forest path was a crowd of animals, at least 20 of them. There was old Mrs. Tootles, the sheep, and her grandkids. There was a family of poodles, with the littlest in a pram, bows in her hair. There was a giraffe whose head brushed the leaves on the oak tree overhead. There was even a sloth trailing behind the group. Each of them clutched a flyer, "Dust Bunnies for Adoption." "I'm gonna need more socks," Snaffles muttered. "Hello, dear," Mrs. Tootles called. "We're here for the Dust Bunnies. Oh, my little lambs, ever so excited." Snaffles thanked them all for coming and asked would they please come back tomorrow. Then he headed back into his shop. He slipped socks on his hands and set to work. Snaffles polished and dusted every nook and cranny left in the cabin. The crack between the floorboards, the underside of the windowsills, and the back of the storage cupboard and top of the fridge, everywhere he could think of. Then, once he had a pile of dust even bigger than the one he'd left behind yesterday, he said goodnight to his shop, scooped up Binky and Soots, and headed back to his tree hollow home. Having Binky and Soots there with him that evening made his heart feel full. He made them a dinner of crunchy carrots and apple pudding. He brushed their fur, and he tucked them each into their own large, fluffy sock, where they fell asleep and snored the sweetest, snuffliest snores. Then he tucked himself into his own bed, pulled his patchwork quilt up to his chin, and smiled, looking up at the crescent moon peering through his window. Please work your magic, he thought to himself, before slipping into dreams. Snaffles dreamt of galloping through the wheat fields with the sun on his fur and his dust bunnies at his side. He dreamt of his little shop and all the shiny things within. He dreamt of all the families out there, also sleeping soundly, who don't yet know that they're about to have a bunny of their own. And in the mushroom-shaped cabin, not too far away, a swirling, sparkling blue light was wrapping itself around a mountain of dust, which lifted and twisted and twirled into the shape of 100 happy little dust bunnies in all the colours of the rainbow. There were 2 little pink ones for Dee Dee and her poodles. There was a lilac one for Mrs. Tootles and a blue one for each of her little lambs. There were 2 brown ones that would ride off on the back of a giraffe. And there was a perfect little white one who was destined for 2 special children who lived nearby. Now we're floating into a deep and peaceful sleep. Feel how your muscles are relaxing. Your arms are heavy and your legs are too, as they loosen and release any tension remaining from the day. Feel how you let your body fall into the cozy warmth of your bed. Close your eyes. Let your eyelids be heavy. Breathe deeply. Breathe in and out. Breathe in and out as you continue to breathe deeply, and as you keep feeling how your body becomes soft and heavy with sleep. Let your mind drift away. That is the wonderful secret about sleep. While your body rests, lying heavily in your bed, your mind is set free, like a bird taking flight from a branch and flying up and up and up into the air. Feel how your mind loosens now, like a balloon that has been untied from a fence, and floats up and up and up like a bird. Up and up and up it floats towards the sky, until it reaches up into the clouds. Imagine that you have risen up high above the world and your head has poked up through the clouds. Then spread out all around you in the silvery moonlight, white fluffy clouds that look like cotton wool or marshmallows. They look so soft and squishy. You can lie back on them and roll around in them. Try it now. Lie back in the soft cradle of the clouds. Feel how they swirl and wrap around your body, holding you gently in the world of sleep. Clouds come in all shapes and sizes. Some are big and fluffy, some are slender wisps. Some look like puffy mushrooms, and others look like paintbrush strokes that have been left on the dark sky. Let your body relax. Let your mind relax too. Let your mind float off into sleep. You are peaceful. You are safe. You are being held in the cozy warmth of sleep. With your eyes closed, let your mind drift up, up, up and away. In the world of dreams, you can go anywhere you like. You can float on blue oceans with ripples and tufts of waves. Or you can visit castles built in the sky with spiraling turrets and drawbridges over sparkling moats. Or you can wander into the peaceful woods where the birds are twittering and the trees are dense with dark green leaves. Breathe in and out. Breathe in and out again as you fall more deeply into your cozy sleep. And with your eyes still closed, take a look around with your mind at where your dreams have taken you. When I fall asleep, I dream that I've gone to a world high up in the clouds. Sometimes the clouds are dappled silver from the moonlight. Sometimes they're soft pink and gold, reflecting the light of the twinkling stars. What form do your dreams take? Where does your mind go when you fall asleep? Maybe in your dreams there are flocks of white fluffy sheep huddling together on the green fields. Look at the mother ewe yawn widely before she tucks her little lambs beneath her woolly fleece. Or maybe you dream of a friendly dragon, curled up with his tail wrapped around him, a little trail of clouds puffing out of his nostrils. Look, the cloud dragon is smiling at us and waving. What a friendly dragon he is. Or maybe you dream of cute puppies lying on their backs, their tongues lolling out of their mouths, their eyes closing because they've had such a long day. They look tired, and there's their papa dog, fluffy and white, padding softly over to wish the puppies good night. Up here on the sea of clouds, you can be free. Feel how light you are, weightless, floating, drifting through sleep. Feel everything heavy from the day lift off you and drift away, taken away by currents until they disappear over the bank of clouds. Any worries you have been having, watch them float away. Anything that has been weighing on your mind during the daytime, now you can let them go and watch them drift away. Your worries are not you. You are not your worries. You can let them go. Watch them float away. Now you are light as air. You are as gentle as starlight. You are as soft as the clouds. Up in the sleepy sky, everything is weightless and peaceful. The clouds stretch out like a sea of tranquility. Close your eyes and feel the clouds wrap around you. Feel them bearing your body gently into the land of sleep. Feel your eyes close. Feel them rest heavily as your body relaxes into sleep. Feel your mind lighten. Feel it loosen and drift away, light as a feather, soft as the clouds. Breathe in and out. Breathe in and out. The world of clouds is waiting for you. Let yourself fall into the clouds' soft, warm hug. They are here to protect you. They are here to cushion you. They are here to hold you as you enjoy your deep and peaceful sleep. Sleep well, little one. Sleep well in the land of clouds. Feel how light you are. Feel how weightless, floating, drifting through sleep, light as air, gentle as starlight, soft as clouds. Good night, little one. Sleep tight.